welcome to the next episode in our series of In Conversation. Today, we are in conversation with Shalini Pillay, who leads all the services that KPMG provides to GCCs across India. Hi, Shalini. Thank you for joining us today. What a pleasure.
Hi, Sukanya. Looking forward to this chat. Great to be chatting with you yet again.
I think we have a very, very interesting conversation today, right? And it touches upon two very critical elements in today's world, and especially levers that have been growth levers for GCCs. The topic at hand here is tech at the edge with data at the center for GCCs, and how that has shaped the trajectory for them. So data, Shalini, as you well know, is nothing new. Enterprises have had data from the first day that they've started operations. However, what has changed in the last few years has been just the availability and the access, the cost of storing it, accessing it. And that has dramatically changed how organizations are taking decisions today, how they're planning their strategy and how they are enabling their journey. So how has this evolution of data into this very, very strong tool really reshaped the functional operating model and the structure or the role of GCC per se?
Thank you, Sukanya. Great way to open this conversation. And clearly, if we look at data over the years, and if we look at the whole GCC model, and in fact, the whole offshoring model over 3 decades, data has always been at the core of it. It was data that got outsourced, that got offshored, and access to that data, technology enabling remote processing that really gave birth to an industry of its own. And when one looks at it today, and if we look at it over the last few years, really what we're talking about is data changing the narrative from what was operational to something that's really strategic today. And there are many reasons and many things that go into influencing this transformation. A large part of it is, I think, the digital embedment across organizations. As organizations up that digital quotient, as they looked at bringing in technology across the business value chain, suddenly data and information visibility got integrated across this value chain. In fact, today, if you look at the GCC model, among other things, and among the big technology trends that have influenced it, it has also changed how what used to get offshored was very sub-process wise, siloed processing to today end-to-end accountability and end-to-end visibility across that value chain. So if you look at now the data that underlies all of this, when you have information visibility from one end of the business value chain to another, you're really looking at data that is very rich in content. It's not siloed slices of data, but you have the ability to look at it in its entirety. And the way we've seen it, GCCs have hence really moved up from what, like I said, what used to be a very operational kind of center over, of course, that has changed many years ago, but today to truly becoming strategic drivers of value for organizations. And we've really seen that happen. So whether it is strategic decision support, whether it's creating innovation hubs that are then looking at different dimensions of that data of how can you really unlock very unique problems, bring different values to the organization. So innovation that data is driving, bringing in market intelligence. So today you have access to not just structured organization data, but you're actually got access to a whole lot of unstructured data, a whole lot of market intelligence. Your ability to then stitch all of that together and really add value has gone up several-fold. Managing risk and compliances very differently, again, given the kind of data access. A whole lot has changed, including, I think GCCs have also played a big role in really driving a very data-driven culture in organizations. Because when you look at the realm of possibilities and what some of the GCCs are driving for the enterprise, the opportunity to really lead culture through this and create a data-driven culture is also actually a very interesting aspect that we're seeing come into play. So in a nutshell, I think it's really changed the game quite significantly.
And what you mentioned at the end is very interesting, the data-driven culture, because interestingly, coming from India is a very interesting, approach, because traditionally if you look at traditional enterprises in India, that has never been necessarily our strength, right? We've been more touch and feel kind of people taking decisions like that. But I think what you said was very right. It just completely changed the way we look at even problem statements, and hence kind of create the culture. You spoke about an important aspect about how, data per se has been able to kind of change the trajectory for the enterprise itself, right? Now, given that, there are multiple priorities, there are so many things that at any point of time an organization has to achieve and work on. How do you think, or how do you see organizations are prioritizing their use cases? That's one approach, like a question, that use cases. Second is, how do they understand what data will make sense for us to kind of consume? And, so what's that framework of how to prioritize use cases and the data usage?
An interesting one, Sukanya, because it is truly a problem of plenty at one level, because there is data that's kind of in many ways imploding. If you look at the data that gets generated across every aspect of the business today. So truly a problem of plenty. But we also see this as hence the need for organizations to be a lot more strategic, a lot more deliberate, collaborative and innovative on how they're actually leveraging and what they want to do with this data. So I would say a few things that go into trying to filter through and really create impact in a meaningful way. The first one is really, I think, having a clear strategic vision on how you are aligning the data capabilities you're creating with the overall business objectives. So what is the organization looking to drive? How much of it is top line agenda driven versus how much of it is optimization driven versus how much of it is innovation led, as examples. So what is the organization's wider strategic objective, and how are your data capabilities and aligning to that? So I think that's, number one and at the core of what you want to do. The second, if I may call it out, is a data governance framework, which becomes extremely important. Because when you have such abundance of data, how are you defining ownership? How are you ensuring at any point the quality standards that one is defining for the organization is absolutely top priority? Because end of the day, you want that single source of truth. You want secure, reliable data that's aligned with organization goals. So I think the governance framework becomes really, really important. Within that, then is a set of prioritization that you need to do. So what are you looking to drive from this data? What is that pecking order of priorities? Very important, because quite often we see this, within a certain transformation program, there could be several little streams of work that take priority, and you lose sight of what's the broader objective. So how do you stay true to purpose? What are the broader objectives, the programs being driven in an organization? How are you leveraging data for the same? To give you an example, we are now seeing GCCs drive a lot of global transformation from the country. So if you look at a large ERP implementation, which in turn is driving transformation, the GCC today is quite at the core or the nerve center of this global delivery model, because the technology is being housed here. Anywhere from 60 to 80% of technology headcount is sitting out of these GCCs driving that implementation. So when you're working on a large transformation program, staying true to those transformation objectives and the many different layers of data that then need to be aligned, and the outcome of how you're mining that data to actually demonstrate how the transformation itself is taking shape is very important. So coming back, like I said, data prioritization becomes important. The ability to experiment and innovate, I would also throw that in as one of the elements, because today organizations are looking at different data-driven solutions to problems. So one is truly looking at, if it's customer experience, if it's vendor experience, what is the data saying to you and how can you innovate using that? So having a sight on experimentation and innovation becomes important. I would say an agile data infrastructure, again, extremely important at how your ability to then leverage the data being generated to build solutions, to manage scale, all of that becomes, again, I think, pretty important. Monetization strategies, looking at talent, how are you actually honing that talent? And that's critical. We spoke of it in the previous question you asked me on culture, because when GCCs are housing as significant proportion of your technology talent, you are actually influencing culture. You're influencing the readiness of the wider enterprise for the future in terms of a skilling standpoint. So I think when we look at the problem of plenty, if you have a meaningful approach aligned to the strategic vision, aligned to your set of priorities, which is critical so that you have meaningful outcomes being generated. And I would say, above all, there are ethical considerations that have to be factored in. Because today, that very data, like we all know, it could have a negative application or an application that could be misused. So how are you making sure that the ethical aspects of it, when you're looking at privacy, data concerns, security concerns, all of that is important. But some of this, Sukanya, you could look at it as hygiene elements. It's in today's environment a must-have. But to your question, I think the alignment at the core to what is the global priority becomes number one, and then a bunch of other things that I think influence it.
Yeah. So fairly a complex framework, actually. I mean, where certain things sound very intuitive, but an organization needs to kind of dig deep to get some of its data in place to decide which data needs to kind of, be prioritized. You touched upon a couple of points, which I want to touch upon, saying that you spoke about privacy, you spoke about governance, you spoke about ethics, you spoke about regulatory environment in which data is used. So how have you seen GCCs being, getting this model right? What have they been doing to ensuring that they're being able to innovate and contribute meaningfully without putting the enterprise at risk?
So I think for GCCs, Sukanya, because we've seen data privacy and security being on the global agenda for a long time. I mean, like we're all aware, our data privacy bill is now in place, but this has been long in place globally.
Right.
So whether it is GDPR compliance, other regional compliances, they have been mandated a while ago. And again, to the point, GCCs are nothing but an extension of that very global enterprise, right? So in some sense, they have been compliant from day one. They have been, I would say, if there was a term, regulatory native, because they've been born with that understanding that you are working in an environment that absolutely has to be safe and secure. So compared to many other models we may have seen in India, I think the GCCs have been compliant from day one, from the word get-go. They have been there because they're aligned to what the global enterprise has to be compliant with. But if we look at evolution, whether it's cloud technology, whether it is further technology evolution, the GCCs have been at the core of being able to leverage that. So one is, like I said, privacy regulations, they've been compliant all through, and that has brought about a huge level of trust and has always provided that security. If you look at, for example, how cloud has influenced some of this, in many ways, it actually allows GCCs access to data centers across locations, fortified with a regulatory layer that actually provides them that security.
Mm-hmm.
But your ability, it doesn't all have to be sitting in your home country. It doesn't all have to be in a center right there. You can access this with the comfort of all of the regulatory layers, the data encryption, the security infrastructure that you've built in, and GCCs have invested significantly in enabling all of that. So I think all of this with real-time data access, being able to, so it's a combination of what cloud has enabled within the guardrails of what the regulatory policies have actually helped make sure is a secure environment. And GCCs today can hence, to the earlier question, actually drive a whole lot of innovation and mine that data to really make impact in some very interesting ways.
It's a very significant point in terms of how, the way GCCs are being seen as an entity or what value they can drive. There has been a lot of democratization in terms of access that you spoke about through the cloud model. Today, you're not restricted, dependent. You work in the same environment and are able to create the same impact. I think that's been a great enabler. A lot of centers of excellence, Shalini, a lot of GCCs have taken the center of excellence model to build the tech capability, right? A lot of the digital skills have been fairly new in India and globally. And the center of excellence model has worked well, be it for blockchain, be it for AI, be it for IoT, ML, whichever you speak about. What has been your experience in how this kind of center of excellence model has enabled, enterprises and GCCs?
Fascinating, actually, Sukanya, the world of COEs, as they call it. Centers of excellence have become you could kind of argue, a cliched term. But essentially, what is it saying? It's talking about GCCs building depth of capability in specific technologies and functional areas. And we've really seen that proliferate, right? I mean, there are automation COEs which have learned to do things differently, making sure that you're not undermining your core platforms by adding a whole lot of bolt-ons, but you're doing this meaningfully to drive automation and drive impact in a certain way. So there's a lot of deep capability around the automation side. There's a whole lot around data analytics, where all GCCs are investing in not just how are you mining data that today exists, but how are you building some intelligent cognitive layers in there to predict and actually look at where the future might lie. So whether it is, to give you an example, lots of examples one can talk about, but going beyond the typical IT, finance, HR kind of functions, if you look at supply chain as an example, one where we've seen procurement centers of excellence, where you're managing procurement best practices from within the GCC. But the ability to monitor your global supply chain from the country, to look at where is your supply chain vulnerable? Are there signs of fragility across some parts of that supply chain? To be able to really look into it and predict where that fragility is likely to kind of set a red alert, so that you can action a few things well ahead of time. So that's an example where today one is mapping some of that here. If you take ESG as a theme, and ESG, again, very, very topical, but it's not about what used to be just data reporting and compliance monitoring. Today, as GCCs at the center of technology are creating digital twins of their organizations, the ability to monitor your assets across the globe, it's fascinating. You can sit in a GCC here and look at your digital footprint, to look at your assets, to look at the state of those assets, to look at actually which of those assets are ready for retirement, which needs refurbishment based on carbon emissions. I mean, that's real meaningful contribution to the ESG agenda from a COE here. So there are lots and lots of examples where across, whether it's automation, data analytics, IoT itself, and how that is changing the world, where GCCs are now ready to build those deep capabilities and those centers of excellence to really make some very, very phenomenal impact. And the use cases are fascinating. I think every week we hear of something new, and it's a huge opportunity. Lots of very interesting POCs being built out of these GCCs, and a lot of it really, I would say majority of it data driven.
And I think another important aspect that COEs have been able to bring in is a lot of standardization in terms of how a new technology is going to be adopted within the organization. I know we don't have much time. I want to ask you one last question. One thing that you think has changed significantly with technology adoption pre and post-COVID?
Well, I think it is just an accelerated pace of adoption, Sukanya. I mean, just the pace at which it is gone across the business value chain is phenomenal. So I think that is what has changed. The pace at which one has adopted it, the openness with which organizations have embraced it, the openness and keenness to bring in new emerging technologies, experiment with it, and really innovate. It may sound cliched because all of this is spoken of, but that's quite literally what we see pan out every single day. A very, very rapid adoption.
No, completely. I think it makes sense. It's driven home the fact that this is the way forward. So whether you adopt it now or later is up to you. but you just have to do it. So opened up the mind and enhanced and accelerated the pace. I think perfectly two points to round off this conversation.
I would say one more, sorry, as you round that off, because it's so pertinent to our theme, which is everything around governance, right? Which makes it really, really critical. Because as we look at it, we are also going into uncharted territory as technology evolves. So how are you consciously monitoring all of the new emerging risks and defining your governance structures accordingly? I couldn't help add that, because it's as critical as the new technology you're adopting.
Yeah. Thank you, Shalini. I think perfect way to kind of end this conversation. So you spoke about how it opened up our minds and made us ready to adopt technology and choose whether we're going to be the laggards or the, early adopters, but we have to choose it nonetheless. The accelerated pace and the governance, which became so critical and just took us to the next level. Thank you for this conversation, Shalini.
Thanks, Sukanya. Thank you.